Get empowered. Inspiring, motivating, empowering. This is the Bev Smith Show. Get empowered.
The National Office of the NAACP, under the tutelage of our friend Benjamin Todd Jellis, has launched a campaign against felony disenfranchisement. They had a rally in Tallahassee, Florida on October the 2nd. The second stop will be in Virginia coming up. The campaign will include billboards and ads on public transportation and will last through 2013, according to the NAACP. If you're a member, check and see what your branch is doing about our prisoners, overcrowded jails, and jails that are labeled for blacks only. Mark, what happens to a person when they come out of prison? If they are branded, it's almost like a scarlet letter on their chest. If they're branded, how can they even try to do better? And if every employee has a dartboard in the target, how can they expect to get a job? Aren't we literally just feeding them out of the system to come back into the system without helping them?
Well, in far too many cases, that's exactly what we're doing. Some of these policies have been around a long time. Some of them are relatively new and grow out of the war on drugs. So right now, for example, depending on the state in which you live, if you have a felony conviction for a drug offense, you might be denied access to welfare benefits and food stamps for the rest of your life. You may be prohibited from living in any kind of public housing. You may have difficulty getting student loans if you want to attend an institution of higher education.
But wait a minute, stop, Mark, for a minute, because that's unbelievable to me. That's unbelievable, because it doesn't happen. If you are an attorney, if you are a lieutenant governor or whatever, and you come out, you write a book, you get a big fund. If you are one of Nixon's playmates and you go to prison, you come out, you say, I'm saved, and you go on TBN and you make money, money, money. But if you're a black man coming out, it does not seem fair that something that I did, that I've served my time for, can do this, particularly if I worked and paid into the tax system. Am I not entitled to some of those dollars coming back to me?
Well, exactly. And, we say in public discussion all the time, well, you've got to go to prison and pay your debt to society. We hear that phrase over and over again. And people come out of prison and they find out belatedly that, no, you never finish paying that debt to society, that being branded as a felon is something that's going to stay with you probably the rest of your life. Now, some of that is cultural, social attitude, stigma. Many people say they don't want to associate with someone who's got a felony conviction. So we need to change some of those attitudes. But a lot of this are laws and policies that have been enacted with the specific intent of excluding people from having access to these benefits. And of course, as you point out, if you're a wealthy person who gets a felony conviction, well, you're probably not going to need food stamps, so it doesn't matter very much if you're excluded from that. But you take poor people who go to prison with few resources to begin with and now are struggling to make it, and we say even that little bit of a social safety net that you thought used to exist, that's no longer there for you either. That's not a real good recipe for success for anybody, I don't think.
So what happens to the system, because it's growing and growing and growing and growing, and there seems to be a theme continuing about punish, but only punish a certain group of people. So if the system is feeding off the system that is feeding off the system, how do we correct it? And isn't part of the problem that we do not have universal penal and justice laws? Because what happens in Pennsylvania may not happen in Virginia. That's crazy. A rapist who rapes in Virginia, why should he be treated any differently than a rapist who rapes in Pennsylvania?
Well, that's our structure of government. The states are going to make their own laws. The little bit of an opening that we see now is that some of the conversation is starting to change. There's a whole discussion now about this problem of prisoner reentry, and basically that's just the fact that when we send people to prison, 95% of them are coming home someday. It may be in a year, it may be in 20 years, but since they're coming back to the community, it should be in everyone's interest that when they come back, they are better prepared, they have more skills, they have more maturity than before they went to prison. And what's striking is that that's starting to create a dialogue among liberals and conservatives. In 2008, Congress passed a bill called the Second Chance Act, which was basically trying to provide resources to help people coming out of prison. And what I think was interesting about it, the political coalition that came together in the House, who's primarily led by members of the Congressional Black Caucus, people like John Conyers, Bobby Scott, Danny Davis, longtime champions reform. In the Senate, it was then Senator Sam Brownback of Texas. If you know anything about Senator Brownback, he was one of the most conservative Republicans. His views on social policy, you could not get more right-wing than that, and yet he was a deeply religious man. He had a belief in forgiveness and redemption and spoke very articulately, saying that, at some point we need to recognize that these are people from our communities and we need to help them come back into society. So that kind of conversation was not taking place 10 and 20 years ago. It's starting to shift a little bit and be a little more reality-based, I think.
What bothers me, and I don't know whether you can politically comment on this, but as I watched what was not a debate last week, and as I watched the lecturing given by Mitt Romney, I became frightened because Mitt Romney would like to see the states control the destiny. And when you say states' rights to me, as an African in America, I start having flashbacks. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what bothers me is it seemed to me that didn't even get a lot of coverage from the media when he said, and I would like to see the state handle this and the state handle that. And that's the movement on Capitol Hill with conservative Republicans in particular right now, to return it to states' rights. What would that mean to the effort to change how the judicial system is enacted, particularly for blacks?
Well, it's you can see that one both ways. If we look at Congress, it's not a pretty picture there either in terms of the federal laws, the federal court system, what they've done. Congress has passed all sorts of, tough on crime policies, and we're talking Republicans and Democrats alike. Bill Clinton, 1994, pushed through a $30 billion federal crime bill that loaded up with money for more prisons and more police officers, and the only reason there was a relative drop in the bucket for prevention was because some of the leaders in the Black Caucus fought very hard to get that in there. But this tough on crime movement for far too long, I think, has cut across political lines, and that's why in Congress we've got all sorts of federal mandatory minimums that in many cases are even tougher than the same penalties if you committed the crime in a state court. So I think we've got a problem all around. It's not like setting standards for integration in education 40 years ago, where we needed the federal government to make sure that children in Alabama and Mississippi would have a right to equal education. Now we've got to work on all these levels together, I think, to make sure that we get some kind of justice.
Mark, when I used to work with my hometown NAACP chapter, I served on the Justice Committee, which was an interesting name for that committee.
Mm-hmm.
And I began